Hey guys, it's Hype Train here, this time with another video on the Callisto Protocol. The Callisto Protocol is a sci-fi survival horror game released on December 2, 2022 for the PS5, PS4, Xbox Series X, Xbox One, and Steam. It is developed by Striking Distance Studios and published by Krafton Inc. This game is considered a spiritual successor to the Dead Space series and is directed by one of the original creators of Dead Space, whose name is Glenn Schofield. This video is my full in-depth review of the game during my 12-hour playthrough on normal difficulty. I purchased the game for PC, which is known for some massive technical issues when the game first launched, so I'll go into detail later on in this video about my experience with the PC port of the game. The Callisto Protocol is going to be a controversial and divisive game where it's going to be a love it or hate it kind of game. The game has received some very mixed reviews so far, and there's going to be some things I've heard from other reviews that I agree with, and some things that I strongly disagree with. With that said, let's go on to my review of the Callisto Protocol.
Don't lose it, Jacob. I just saved your life.
The graphics and the presentation of the Callisto Protocol are going to be the game's main strengths. The graphics are absolutely stunning, and this is a game that looks and feels next-gen. There's an insane amount of detail in the environments and character models. The designs of the enemies are very well done and look fantastic, and they're very reminiscent of something you'd expect from the sci-fi or movie classic The Thing. The game uses lighting very well. The crazy part is that I did turn down a lot of the lighting and special effects settings due to performance, which I will talk about more in depth in the technical issues part of the video. Despite that, the game still looks really good during my playthrough. I've seen videos of the game with the graphics turned up all the way with max settings, and it is one of the best looking games on the market today. The other parts of the presentation do a good job of immersing you in the game. There's not a lot of music in this game, but when there is music, it really helps makes you feel tense and suspenseful during the horror scenes of the game. The combat sound effects are brutal and visceral, and the melee combat feels very intense and impactful. There's not a lot of HUD elements and loading screens in this game, which makes this game feel cinematic and immersive. The game hides a lot of loading with scenes where you wait for a door to open, or you're crawling through a vent, or you're squeezing through tight spaces. This part of the game I really enjoyed since it's more cinematic and immersive and much more interesting than looking at loading screens. Another big highlight of this game are the death animations. The death animations are insane, and I really wish I could show off some of them, but they're a bit too violent for YouTube, and I am trying to get my channel monetized. I had a lot of fun just dying in different ways just to see all the death animations out there. My favorite one is where an enemy pulls out Jacob's eyes and eats them, while Jacob screams in agony and blood starts pouring out of Jacob's eye sockets. So let's talk about the storyline of the Callisto Protocol. The game takes place in the far future where mankind has the technology to go into space. You play as Jacob Lee, who works for a transport company that has been transporting cargo between Callisto and Europa, both which are moons of Jupiter. Jacob is on a transport job with his partner Max Barrow going to Europa when his ship is boarded by the Outer Way, a group known for carrying out terrorist attacks. The ship gets damaged and crashes onto Callisto. Max is killed, and the only survivors are Jacob and Danny, the leader of Outer Way. Callisto is known for having a big prison facility known as Black Iron. The head security of Black Iron, Captain Ferris, finds Jacob and Danny and imprisons them on orders of Warden Cole. While in prison, there is a virus outbreak that happens that turns almost the whole population of Black Iron into creatures known as biophages. The best way I would describe these creatures would be alien zombies. So Jacob tries to survive and escape Callisto, as well as find out more about the virus outbreak. In a lot of other reviews, many criticized the storyline, saying the storyline was really thin and it needed more cutscenes and better characters. I personally enjoyed the storyline of the Callisto Protocol. It is a mostly simple and straightforward story, and if you watch a lot of sci-fi movies or played a lot of sci-fi games like Doom or Dead Space, the plot twists in the storyline won't surprise you that much. The whole story feels like an homage to B sci-fi horror movies, which as a horror fan I can appreciate it. I enjoyed that the storyline was very focused and not trying to be something that it's not. I actually enjoyed that the storyline was presented through mostly in-game scenes and scripted moments. For those who are interested in learning more details about the backstory and lore, there are audio logs you can find and listen to. Many critics complain about the characters, but I personally found that the characters got the job done. Jacob is just a normal dude trying to survive a messed up situation, and I feel that it doesn't really need to be any deeper than that. I personally don't want to know Jacob's whole life story. I'd rather have the storyline know what it's supposed to be and stay in its lane, rather than trying to be something it is not and failing miserably. A lot of modern AAA games go for the Witcher 3 type of storytelling with lots of cutscenes and dialogue, and I find that it doesn't work for a lot of games since the writing is nowhere as good as The Witcher 3. So the Callisto Protocol storyline feels like a throwback to the Xbox 360 PS3 era of games like Doom 3, BioShock, and Dead Space. In those games, the storyline happened in-game mostly through scripted moments and not told through hours of cutscenes. So this game feels like a breath of fresh air to me in today's gaming market. I do admit that I wish some parts of the storyline could be fleshed out a little bit more, especially towards the end of the game. And the game does end very suddenly with a cliffhanger ending, making the storyline feel incomplete. It seems that either sequels or DLC are planned to continue the story. The gameplay loop of the Callisto Protocol is simple and straightforward. Most of the gameplay is combat and fighting against enemies. When you're not in combat, you're exploring the environment and gathering items such as ammo and health packs. There are also a lot of scripted moments and cutscenes that help tell the game story. There are upgrade stations where you can use credit to buy items or buy upgrades for your weapons. There are several reviews that criticize the game for being too linear. And it is true, the game is mostly linear and levels do feel like one long corridor where it's very clear the path you need to take to progress the game. There are side paths here and there where there are extra items and sometimes even audio logs. I actually didn't mind the linear level design that much. It kept the game focused and made the game feel fast paced. Also, the environments are so well done with so much graphical detail and immersion that I didn't care that they were linear. Personally, I'm burnt out on games with big open environments that are empty and take forever just to travel through. I was very rarely confused on where to go, and the side paths were enough exploration for me. I enjoyed that I was able to mostly get right into combat, which I will talk more about in the next section of the video. In other reviews, the game is criticized for not having puzzles. I do admit that I would like a few simple puzzles here and there for some variety in the gameplay loop, but I felt that the game didn't absolutely need them. And I do find puzzles in other games a lot of the times to be more of an annoyance and broke the flow of the game's pacing. There's a lot of survival horror indie games like Outlast and Scorn that focus on puzzles as part of their main gameplay loop, and those games will always do puzzles better. The combat aspect of this game is going to be a love it or hate it kind of deal. Either it's going to click with you and you enjoy it, or it's not going to click and you hate it. I've read a lot of takes on the combat from other reviews, and this is where I have to strongly disagree with those takes. So the first half of the game, the melee combat, is a big focus. The melee combat has you use a stun baton as a weapon. You also get a pistol, but the pistol is weak, and you mainly want to use it for the instant headshots you can do after you use a melee combo. The way the melee works in this game is that it uses a dodge system. You're supposed to dodge melee attacks from an enemy, and after dodging, you perform your own melee attacks. You dodge by either holding left or right on the analog stick. You don't have to time it correctly, just holding it works. If the enemy performs another attack, you have to avoid it by pushing the analog stick in the other direction. So if you held right to dodge the first attack, you have to hold left to dodge the second. The amount of attacks an enemy does at a time will vary. Sometimes an enemy will just do one attack. Sometimes it will be a combo of 2 to 4 attacks. You have to pay attention to the enemy and know when it's your turn for an opening to do your melee attacks. You can also block by holding back, but you still take damage from attacks, just not as much. I actually really enjoyed the melee combat in this game. It feels very tense and suspenseful, like you're fighting for your life. If you make a mistake and attack at the wrong time, the enemy can throw an attack and deal a lot of damage to you. It's also very visceral and violent. I just love doing a melee combo and shooting an enemy in the head to get a kill. A lot of the reviews complained that the melee combat felt frustrating when you fought against multiple enemies. They complained that while you were dodging one enemy and trying to melee them, another enemy would attack from behind, and this caused a lot of frustrating deaths. This is where I think reviewers aren't really understanding how the game is supposed to be. It's a survival horror game. Enemies are supposed to feel like a big threat. Being surrounded by enemies is supposed to feel very dangerous and something you should avoid. It is not an action game like Devil May Cry where you just walk up to enemies out in the open, mashing the melee attack button and slaughtering all your enemies. I feel like reviewers aren't giving the combat a fair chance and taking their time to learn it because it's something new and different. They're approaching the melee combat like other games they played before and getting destroyed for it. Not only that, but they could have lowered the difficulty if they're constantly dying all the time. If they're playing on easy mode and still kept dying, then it's clearly a skill issue. Most of the game's combat encounters, you're fighting up to 3 enemies at most. There are very few rare instances where you fight up to 4 enemies at once, but those sections are designed for you to use your gravity gun for environmental kills. You can also find yourself getting completely swarmed by more than 4 enemies at a time if you fail a section where you're supposed to use stealth. So for most of the combat encounters, I found them manageable as long as I used my brain to actually think about how I approached those combat encounters. There's a lot of tactics you can use. You can use your gravity gun to see if you can get an environmental kill or throw an explosive at an enemy. Or you can use the gravity gun just to throw an enemy far away, then you engage the other enemy in melee combat. Or you can just reposition yourself and retreat to a place where you can choke point the enemies and they can't surround you, and you pick them off one by one with melee. You can also use your pistol to shoot an enemy's leg to CC them. You can also upgrade your baton to have a strong attack, which can actually knock an enemy far away. I got through most of the combat just fine if I didn't just run up to enemies mashing the melee attack button mindlessly. I did die quite a few times, but most deaths I felt like they were my fault and I could have played things out differently. The second half of the game, you do get access to powerful guns such as a shotgun, an assault rifle, and a powerful pistol type weapon called a skunk gun. You can focus your upgrades on these guns and play the combat like it's Resident Evil 4, just gunning your way through if you want to. I really enjoyed the combat in the second half of the game because the combat opened up more and I had more options. I was using a mix of my powerful late game guns, stealth kills using the gravity gun, and melee combat, and it felt so satisfying and fast paced. Unfortunately, New Game Plus is not available at the moment, since I would really like to replay the game with all my guns intact on a higher difficulty. I do admit that the melee combat could be a bit better if it was refined a bit more. I think that there should be a dedicated dodge button that you hold down and then you hold left or right to dodge. That way you can decide if you want to dodge an attack or you want to just keep moving to left or right. And this would help with a lot of people who are frustrated with the melee combat in big groups of enemies. I do think that there should be a higher difficulty where you have to actually time your dodge and you have to press a specific direction based on where an enemy attack is coming from or you get hit. I hope that maybe Striking Distance Studios can add these type of adjustments in a later update. Personally, I was never scared while playing the Callisto Protocol. I am a big fan of horror, but I rarely get scared while playing horror games or watching horror movies. Pretty much I'm desensitized to any form of horror these days. I enjoy horror more for the themes, aesthetics, and violence. The horror in the Callisto Protocol are mostly jump scares or scripted moments that are supposed to make you feel tense. It's mostly in line with the horror in Dead Space 1, which I really enjoyed but was never really scared. I really enjoyed the sections where you have to fight or sneak past the enemy that has no eyes. Those scenes are the closest in the game to being horror. As a survival horror game, this game leans more towards being an action game with horror elements, similar to Resident Evil 4. Striking Distance Studios plans to have a 4-year support plan for the game with DLC and updates. On February 7th, 2023, there will be a completely free update that will add New Game Plus and Hardcore mode. Also on February 7th is the Outer Way Skin Collection, basically a set of skins to customize the look of Jacob. On March 2023, the Contagion bundle will come out. Contagion is a new mode that has reduced health and ammo drops and permadeath. It also includes 13 new death animations and the Watchtower skin collection. In spring 2023, the Riot bundle will come out. The Riot bundle has a horde mode where you fight waves of enemies as long as you can. The Riot bundle also includes 12 new death animations and the Engineer skin collection. In summer 2023, a new story DLC will come out. As of right now, the game doesn't really have much for replay value, as there is no New Game Plus right now. So I'm personally just going to wait until the free update to start another playthrough. I'll also check out the DLC when they come out, because they do seem to add interesting content to the game. Unfortunately for the PC version, many including myself have ran into a lot of performance issues. The game was a starting mess, and getting a smooth, consistent frame rate was very difficult. When the game launched on December 2nd, many on PC reported that the game was unplayable for them. They have released a patch on December 3rd, and that patch seemed to make the game a lot more playable for many people. Apparently, the frame rate issue was due to the game using Unreal Engine 4 and the way the engine handled compiling shaders. I did notice the game running a lot smoother for me after the patch, especially during combat. There were still some areas where the game's frame rate dropped, especially in areas with a lot of light and special effects. But the game for the most part was playable for me, where I got mostly 50 to 55 frames per second, and the frame rate was never to a point where it completely ruined my experience. And I am running the game with a mid-end gaming rig with a GTX 1660. I did watch streams where people that have more powerful gaming rigs run this game on max graphics, and the game ran very smoothly for them after the patch. For the console versions of the game, I've read that the game runs mostly smooth for Xbox Series X and PS5. There are still some frame rate drops, but the game seems to be more smooth for the most part on consoles. The PS5 seems to be the best version of the game performance-wise, so if you have a PS5 and want the best experience, then you want to get the PS5 copy of the Callisto Protocol. Here I'm going to summarize all the positives of this game. The game's graphics are some of the best in gaming today. The game is very immersive and cinematic. The combat feels good when it clicks and you're using all the tools you have. The game is very violent and the death animations are insane and unlike anything you've seen in any other game. Here I'll summarize the negatives of this game. The technical issues have improved after the patch, but there can still be instances of choppy frame rate. You'll need a beefy gaming rig if you want a completely smooth experience. It's more of an action game with horror elements, though it might not fit everyone's definition of a survival horror game. Some of the game design, such as the melee combat in the linear levels, might not be everyone's cup of tea. The game is only about 8 to 12 hours. There's not much replay value now, and we'll have to wait for the free update in DLC for more content. The storyline is straightforward and is nothing special. It's predictable if you played a lot of sci-fi games before. The game could use more variety with more enemy types, more bosses, and more weapons. Hopefully some DLC comes out to help out in this aspect. For me, I've really enjoyed my time playing the Callisto Protocol, and I did not regret spending $60 on it at all. It was a breath of fresh air to me in today's gaming market. The game really felt like throwback to games from the Xbox 360/PS3 era that I really enjoyed. There's not a lot of AAA survival horror games out there, and sci-fi survival horror games are even more rare. The last AAA sci-fi horror game was Alien Isolation in 2014. So to me, as a big fan of horror games, I thought it was well worth the purchase for playing a new AAA horror title with really good production value. For anyone on the fence on whether they should purchase the game, I suggest getting to know what this game is and deciding if it's worth it for them. It's a very focused game that knows its strengths and its identity and doesn't overstep its boundaries. If your idea of a good survival horror game are games like Resident Evil 7 and 8, Outlast, and Alien Isolation, this game is not for you. If you want a game with more open environments and exploration, then this game is not for you. If you want a more storyline driven game with a lot of dialogue and cutscenes, then this game is not for you. If you want a game with 100 plus hours of content, then this game is not for you. If you enjoyed games with action oriented survival horror like Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, and you can come into this game with an open mind about the melee combat, then you can enjoy this game. If you have a lot of games to play at the moment, or you're still not exactly sure if this game is right for you, or you're not a super crazy big fan of survival horror, you might want to wait for a sale to buy the game. In all, I give the Callisto Protocol a 7.5 out of 10. It was a mostly solid attempt at creating a similar experience to Dead Space with some unique twists like the melee combat. It was very refreshing to me in today's gaming market. Survival horror games are rare, and I'm happy that this game doesn't follow modern gaming trends that I'm personally tired of. I read a lot of the early negative reviews and was disappointed, but I'm happy I actually played the game and judged it myself instead of listening to those reviews. I strongly disagree with a lot of the negative reviews out there on this game that give the game lower scores like 5 and 6 out of 10. I fully understand their gripes on the technical issues, but the takes on the combat and the storyline are utterly ridiculous. I feel a lot of the reviewers didn't take their time to understand the game mechanics and blame the game for their misplay. The storyline gripes, I believe most reviewers aren't understanding that this game is not trying to be the next Witcher 3. I'm not claiming that the game is a perfect masterpiece or Game of the Year material, but this game isn't Fallout 76 either. I feel it's a mostly solid game that does not deserve the super low scores. This game is a very focused game that's going to appeal to a specific audience, so it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But I'd rather have a focused game than a game that tries too hard to appeal to everyone. I find that it's usually the games that try to make everyone happy are the very mediocre 3 out of 10 games. That's why it's really difficult to make a game that everyone is going to agree universally is a good game in today's gaming market. The gaming market has grown so much, and the people in the market are going to have very different tastes. Another good example of this happening is Sonic Frontiers, a game that had gotten mostly negative reviews but was absolutely loved by most who played it. I myself haven't played Sonic Frontiers yet, but I plan to in the future when I have the spare time. So that's it for this review. If you like this video, please click on the like and subscribe button. It helps out my channel, and it helps me put out more content such as this video. Once again, my name is Hype Train, I'm signing out, and I'll see you next time.